Next, from the state capitol, on the day before the end of the legislative session, we spoke with Democratic Senator Jeff Schoenberg about the Republicans' concerns that shifting the cost of future pensions to local school districts might force schools to take money from the classroom. This runs about 8 minutes.
Senator Jeff Schoenberg, we just came out of the Senate Executive Committee. What was your reaction to, now that we have the pension bill and some of the testimony today?
Well, my immediate reaction is that we need to cut through all the rhetoric and find a way to inject more resources into all of the retirement systems so that they no longer carry an unfunded liability that's at $83 billion. 20 years ago, that unfunded liability was at $8 billion. It's the direct result of what's happened in both Republican administrations and Democratic administrations. I still think that there's ways to responsibly strike at a middle ground so that people will indeed know that their retirement systems are financially secure.
Are you happy with the legality, or the what Eric Madeir, the Senator Cullerton's counsel, laid out as far as how to get around the constitutional aspect of diminishing pensions, that you're going to give employees a choice to keep what they had and lose their health care, or go with the new system and maintain the health care?
I thought it was a very innovative approach that unquestionably is still going to be tested in the courts if it is in fact signed into law, because the counter argument is also a strong one, which is that it may be coercive to get people to make one choice over another, and the fact that there's a real possibility and a scenario where people could actually lose their access to health care entirely would seem to underscore that point. But still, I have to say that I'm waiting to hear some more substantive counter proposals on how we're going to reduce the unfunded liability. I'm also waiting to hear as to whether or not we're going to see any change in the status quo. I was the chief sponsor of a couple of measures which sought to tackle this issue of the unfunded liabilities, the graduated contributions towards health insurance premiums for retirees. I thought was a very responsible approach that ensured that people who were of a higher income level would pay more towards their health insurance premiums, when 90% of all retirees were paying nothing at all towards premiums. That in turn would protect the very vulnerable pension recipients who are on fixed incomes, who I think all of us want to protect their financial security. I also, several years ago, put the brakes on what local school districts were doing as far as these very dramatic increases in end-of-career salaries. You know, we sat through hours of testimony today, and I didn't hear one word about how suburban school districts granted very generous end-of-career salary increases to administrators. I didn't hear a single word about how we were going to reduce the number of superintendents in suburban regions. I have communities in my district, Skokie and Glenview, communities of between 50 and 60,000 residents, where they have 5 or 6 K-8 districts. There's been no discussion about any of that, so because it's been incomplete, I think there still is time to achieve some middle ground. Failure really isn't an alternative for us, because the unfunded liability and those financial pressures are already crowding into our ability to invest more in classrooms, to provide quality health care, and to perform other critical services.
And then lastly, what about the, are you going to need the Republicans' votes, do you imagine, to pass this? And what about the Republican leadership wants to do away with the cost shift to local school districts and community colleges? What is your take on their amendments?
Well, so interestingly, I've always had reservations about the willingness of a number of Republicans to find middle ground on this issue. I think we've seen through the retiree health insurance premium issue and other similar issues where we need to make some tough choices that you have a lot of downstate Republicans who talk a good game about being fiscally conservative at the Tea Party rallies, but when they come here and you ask them to do something, they're like New Deal Democrats. The next time they say no to the public employee unions will be the first time. So that kind of protectionist thinking, I don't think is constructive, and I think it's going to be an impediment. Arguably, if this cuts across geographical lines, I think there's more of an opportunity for suburbanites of both parties to reach middle ground than there is for downstaters. And because this is a shared responsibility, I question whether or not downstate Republicans are willing to make some very difficult choices, or instead they'll find greater comfort in running into the arms once again of the public employee unions, which is rather ironic if you think about it.
It is certainly not what we think of stereotypically. Lastly, are you concerned if we have the cost go to the schools about, some schools are wealthier than others, and a number of principals and administrators I've talked to said we don't have any room in our budgets to start picking up these costs. Should we be concerned about the quality of education going down as they have to take money, they would argue, out of the classrooms?
Well, I don't think any money should be going out of the classrooms. In fact, I find it interesting that the people who leap out of their chairs the fastest are the administrators, even faster the teachers. They do so because they want to make sure that the public understands that in their view the problem and the burden only falls on the teachers. When in suburban communities like my own, we have school districts that have multiplied like rabbits, all of whom have administrators who are at the top of the pay scale in the state. And there's never any discussion about consolidating those districts, about eliminating headcount in the upper tier of the administrative lines. So I think that it's a bit premature to rush to those conclusions. It's a given that there are districts that vary in their ability to handle that additional burden, and that's why there would be a longer transitional period where they would have to make that change. Some of them, especially the more distressed ones, wouldn't have to make that change at all because of their serious financial condition. But there are a lot of school districts. There are a lot of suburban communities in the metropolitan Chicago area where the superintendents, who are at the top of the pay scale, they don't talk at all about shared sacrifice. They don't talk at all about reducing their administrative lines. They just quickly turn and point to the teachers and say, well, we're going to need to do something about the classroom. And I don't think that's an automatic. I think that they have to look in their own house as well. That's part of the leadership responsibility that they've assumed.
Senator Jeff Schoenberg, thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel.